Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and welcome to a brand new movie review. Throughout this week, in the lead up to Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales, we'll be reviewing each of the Pirates of the Caribbean films, and we're kicking off today with a film that started it all way back in 2003 with Gore Verbinski's Curse of the Black Pearl. We've been talking about this before we hit record, but we think this might be the actual first official time on the channel that we've actually really sat down and talked about these films. Like, it's just never really come up in conversation since these films have... what we thought had ended before we get in the fifth movie coming out.
Yeah, it's a weird one because it's a massive franchise. I mean, this is one of the biggest franchises of all time, let alone like the past sort of 10 years. And because it's been essentially dead in the water, no, that was not an intended pun. Because it's been dead, there hasn't been really a time to discuss it. Like, we get Marvel every couple of months, we get DC every couple of months, and we obviously have Star Wars annually now. And Pirates, it's kind of just swept in under the radar, like it's back, and you know, we kind of clicked on, wait, we haven't spoken about this. It's a bit like when we've done Alien recently. I think before the Alien reviews you and Tom did, we did nothing except one Prometheus review, and that's not even really Alien in itself.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as you said, there was a time when I'm looking at my film shelf now, I would hold this up with like my favourite franchise of all time, like alongside Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, my next trilogy of films before On Stranger Tides comes out, although we'll get to that much later in the week. I held it right up there. This was one of my favourite things. They're always like go-to entertainment films for me. And so this week we're pretty much just going to go through the entire film series leading up to the new one, and we're going to keep this very relaxed, very informal. We do have a plan for it, but like the Harry Potter ones, we're just kind of going to share our history with the franchise, our own opinions on it as we go through each of the films. So I guess that's what we'll kick off with, sort of thoughts on the series overall, really, and how you got into Pirates of the Caribbean.
Oh, it's a weird one with me. It's a bizarre one. Like, we spoke about it yesterday before we started recording, and it's a film series that I wasn't late in joining. So essentially what happened when the first one, I know this is kind of first time watching, I wasn't aware of Pirates of the Caribbean until Dead Man's Chest came out. I had no idea about the film. I think I'd seen a picture or a clip or two online. Didn't have a clue it was about pirates, didn't know anything about being a Disneyland ride. But before we get into the first time I watched it, my thoughts on the series, it's genuinely really close to my heart. Similar to Harry Potter, but because it hadn't been around for so long, it kind of hidden in the background. And this is a series where I've had DVDs, I've upgraded those DVDs into Blu-rays. Some of them I've upgraded into 3D, well, the fourth one, I guess. And I was massive on this. For those that don't know, I love Davy Jones. He's one of my favourite villains of all time. But this had a big impact on me, this series, and mainly I'd say the second film, more than anything. I think I was 10 when it came out. We'll go into more detail on Dead Man's Chest review, but that had a massive impact on me at the time. But this is a series where one of my good friends from secondary school, we would we'd wait till to reenact it, but we'd watch the films. It was one of our sort of films in marathon and stuff. We'd always talk about Pirates of the Caribbean, that malarkey. It's a film, you know, thinking back, I had a lot of fond memories of this series, and to this day, I still think it is one of the strongest film series today. I'm just going to say it, before me and you hit record, we kind of said, you know, had that fourth film not have come out, then the hype on the new one would be huge, because it would be reuniting the old cast, similar to Star Wars, similar to all the modern film trend of re-bringing back everything. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of happy it's coming back, and it's completely under the radar, even the fifth one, except obviously the court case at the minute. But yeah, it's dear to my heart, this series, but it's just not spoken about.
Yeah, same here. And if we're looking at those other big film franchises, you can kind of remember where you were the first time you saw Phantom Menace or Lord of the Rings, for me, for example. And although I love this franchise, I don't really have that clear-cut memory of seeing a trailer or seeing a clip or anything like that. I just remember, I think it was one Saturday, I just went to the cinema with my parents. I would have been 10 years old when this movie came out, and I was just completely enraptured by it. Like, I was properly into pirate. I mean, growing up as a kid, like, you're always into pirates with whatever you see, whether it's a Disney film or whatever it happens to be. But this revitalized a completely dead genre of movies. If you look at the 1950s, for example, with like Treasure Island, they were massive. They were all made like that. It was kind of like how the spaghetti westerns were at the time, and then it went away, faded away from audience. This really brought it back and gave it a modern edge to it, with modern technology and just really standout performances, especially from Geoffrey Rush and Johnny Depp. And I remember the one memory of the first film in the cinema I remember is when it hit the credits and the music came on, and we'll talk about the soundtrack later. And I just remember like bouncing up and down in my chair like, this is the most awesome thing I've ever seen in my life, and I love it. And then after that, you're reenacting Jack Sparrow every chance you can, because it was a completely different character we hadn't seen before. And it was, like you with Dead Man's Chest, that was the movie that came out in 2006, didn't it? So that came out 3 years after the first one. That was one of the first movies I remember genuinely being hyped for, because of what I'd experienced with this first movie. And I guess I'll say it right off the bat as well, Curse of the Black Pearl is my favourite one of the series. And I think for most people it is, although I know, like you said, you have more fonder memories in terms of the characters and I guess the cinema-going experience of the second one.
Yeah, well, I won't say cinema-going experience, because I saw it on DVD. If I'm going to talk about the first time watching one, I'll go into more detail on it. So, like I said earlier, I'd seen, I think, a clip before, and I'll tell you what clip it was, because it was when you first meet Jack Sparrow when he walks off the boat. I remember seeing that at a friend's house. Like, it was on in the background when our families went over. They turned it off because we just arrived. And you know, the first time I saw Pirates of the Caribbean 1 was the day that Pirates of the Caribbean 2 came out. And, well, no, sorry, it wasn't the day, it was the weekend. Because I was at, a really long, unnecessary story short, I was at a sort of a family friend barbecue, and every year at this barbecue I'd always go over to my other friends that lived opposite the road, and I went to their house and they had me in for a bit and they said, sorry, you can't stay too long, we're all going to the cinema to watch Pirates of the Caribbean. And I was like, what's that? And they were talking to me about it. They said the first one was amazing, blah blah blah. And then off that I saw a trailer for 2. Around this time the internet was there, and you would watch video trailers on like piratesofthecaribbean.com, starwars.com, back then before YouTube. And I remember saying, this film looks really cool, I want to see the first one. And this is how long ago, especially for those English viewers, I bought it at Woolworths. Pirates of the Caribbean 1 on DVD, and it was the lost disc. Nice. It came with like an extra disc with the medallion. And I remember putting it on for the first time. I can't remember how I felt watching it, but I loved it. I had such good fun. I was like, okay, I really, really want to see the second film. Unfortunately, I didn't get around to seeing Dead Man's Chest till DVD. However, my experience of 1 is bizarre, because I was essentially, 3 years late to the party? But I really loved it, and that's where it captivated me, because, you know, there hadn't been films like this before. It was fresh and unique. You know, it's a blockbuster, but you don't see these giant ships going around, and I remember loving it, considering it was in DVD at home. You know, I'd actually go to the cinema to watch a Pirates film until the 4th one came out, and that's the wrong one to go see at the cinema for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm holding the DVD here right now. I don't have the lost disc edition. I have the 2-disc edition. And actually, thinking back, this was probably one of the first DVDs I ever bought. I bought this in the time that videos were kind of dying out, but they were still available. I think you can still get Curse of the Black Pearl on VHS. And I used to buy them on both formats. I did that with Finding Nemo. I did that with a few other films as well, because I liked having my VHS collection, and then DVDs were obviously coming in at that time, so I bought it on both. It's so difficult not to talk about just all these films in one go, just because of the sheer impact that it's had on us. But we'll go more into the first film now and go more in depth into it. So the plot for Curse of the Black Pearl, for anyone that doesn't know, the story follows pirate Captain Jack Sparrow, played by Johnny Depp, and blacksmith Will Turner, played by Orlando Bloom, as they rescue the kidnapped Elizabeth Swann from the cursed crew of the Black Pearl, captained by Hector Barbossa, who become undead skeletons at night. Really, really simple idea for a plot, and I actually think that the whole undead curse thing actually came into the film through the second rewrite of the script. Originally, they just wanted to go all-out piratey with it, and I think that was sort of like shot down because they wanted some kind of angle with it. And really, that angle of the whole cursed pirates or ghost pirates is a thing that's continued in pretty much every entry of the series from this point.
Yeah, it's, if you look at the first one, just as a thought to the series, you've nailed it. With each crew is like that. We've had skeletons, we've had ghosts, we've had
fish people.
The fish people, and I'm trying to remember Blackbeard's one.
They were like a zombified crew. They didn't really play the angle up as much in that, but they were still zombified. Yeah,
and you know, and each film has had a Christ, I've forgotten the term for it. The MacGuffin.
Yeah.
Obviously the curse in this, the heart in the second, the fourth one, the Fountain of Youth, the new one. the Poseidon's trident. So I like that they've stuck with that because they're very formulaic, but they've been so different. They've been able to do different things with the story. But it's so easy to fall into the trap of doing pirates just fighting and killing each other and stealing from towns. By adding these angles to it, I think it's given this series sort of time to breathe, and it's been able to do new things and go on like new adventures as such.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, with Disney as well, this was based on a ride attraction at Disneyland, at Disney World and Disneyland. Now, I went to Disneyland for the first time when I was 7 years old, but I was like an absolute chicken with rides then. Like, I wouldn't go on anything, so I didn't go on any of the rides at Disneyland. So my first experience with Pirates of the Caribbean was with this movie. Then I went on the ride afterwards, many years later after that, and it's amazing how they crafted this film out of that concept of a ride. Like, I remember people saying, like, how can you make a film on a ride? And Disney tried to do it afterwards with films like The Haunted Mansion, and many years after that with Tomorrowland, to varying degrees of success. They've never really been able to capture the lightning in the bottle that was this first movie. And what I like about this movie is, in terms of its plot compared to the other Pirates of the Caribbean films, it's so stripped down and simple, but it works. You know, you've got a cursed crew that are trying to lift the curse, and then really Jack Sparrow's just on a mission of revenge because they marooned him. And that's it. That's the plot, essentially the plot of this movie. And what I like about it as well is that Jack Sparrow's, you know, he's a funny character in this one, but they really play him up as that jester role and really ramp up the comic relief in the next ones. This is like a personal story to him. And actually, you were telling me about this, but the director of this new one coming out, Dead Man Tell No Tales, he kind of said the opposite of that the first film wasn't about Jack Sparrow, but I would argue against that the film, more than any of the other films with Jack Sparrow, this one is about him.
It's a weird one. So when we meet Jack, I think, if I go into what the director said now, I was kind of thrown off guard because I kind of get it. When the film starts, it's about Will and Elizabeth, and I'm just going to assume it's about the 20-30 minute mark where we actually meet Jack for the first time, but the story is already progressing at this point of you've set up the Will and Elizabeth love triangle. They've got Commodore Norrington's engagement in there. Jack's not introduced till there is a story in place, and then Jack furthers said story. Whereas in 2, 3, and 4, rather than have, I mean, yes, in 2 we get the whole Will and Elizabeth marriage thing. They make it so Jack Sparrowy that he's chucked in there from the get-go because he's Jack Sparrow. And when I saw what the director wrote in Empire magazine, I was kind of caught off guard because I thought, you know what, I kind of do agree with that. It makes film so much better when characters meet out of necessity, and Jack wasn't necessarily there. He needed to be there to obviously save Elizabeth. He saved her. That's his instruction to those guys. And if you look at the films that came after, just off Jack Sparrow as a character quickly, he's never been my favourite in this series, but there is no doubt that his strongest film, story-wise as well, yes, is the first one. I mean, once Jack comes in, then you get the connection of the medallion, this, that, and the other. And I think that's major to this, but I get what the director was saying, and I think he's tries to do the same, where he's going to bring Jack into the new film by, there already being a story in place, which could help it, I don't know, but Jack's such an interesting character because, well, I don't want to say interesting character, he's very two-dimensional, but when you're kind of watching him on screen, you genuinely don't know what he's going to do next, and I think that is a good thing, but especially for the first film, because he's so new, there's been nothing like him. By the time he gets to the fourth one, you're tired of the same old catchphrases. You know what he's going to do. You know what's going to happen. And I know that these blockbuster films do this. It's repetitive, but I don't feel there's been any character development from the first film to the fourth.
With Jack Sparrow, no.
Yeah, with Jack.
I completely agree with that. I mean, he gets a complete arc in this movie. He ultimately claims to go. He's just in it for the Black Pearl in this. He wants some kind of redemption. He wants some revenge. He wants to get his ship back, his crew, and he achieves that at the end. And in that one moment, I know I'm jumping right ahead to the end of the film here, but when he does get aboard and he's at the helm, and Johnny Depp just plays it so well. He's the most, I don't want to say normal character in this, but he feels more like an actual character rather than just all-out comic relief like he is in the next ones. And that's why I think I like this movie the best as well. Just in terms of plot, it's my favourite, but Johnny Depp is just incredible in this film. And I think it was kind of a comeback role for him, kind of like how Iron Man was for Robert Downey Jr. I think this was for Johnny Depp as well. I mean, he was nominated for an Academy Award for this film. I know that's probably up for debate whether you think he was eligible for an Academy Award from this film. I think he was. I think he really made the role his own. He's really just the only character now, Barbossa, I guess you can say, that's carrying this franchise on his shoulders. And the fact that, you know, he's gone on record saying that he based the character on Keith Richards, and then they brought him in as a kind of in-joke later on in the series. He's amazing. And also the impact that this film had on Depp's own career, for better or worse. I mean, after this, most of his roles have been these colourful, made-up, wacky characters, like in the Tim Burton films, for example. I mean, after this, he did Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, did a voice in Corpse Bride, you've got Sweeney Todd, Alice in Wonderland, the list goes on and on and on. And I think you can really pinpoint the inception of that to this movie.
Yeah, and going off with Barbossa carrying the series, I believe with that entirely. And as well with the Oscars, I think he was deserved nomination. Like I said, the first performance. If I could be at this age watching that film, then I would be sitting there thinking, you know what, this should be up for Oscars. You know, just because it's a blockbuster film, you are allowed to be nominated for an Oscar. That's how I felt with The Dark Knight, with Heath Ledger, and that did happen. Obviously, I was still a bit younger there, but when you're in the daylight of knowing Oscar season, I would have been like, yeah, he probably deserves that for sure. But with the other characters in the series with Jack, it just hasn't progressed. That's what I wanted to say mainly with them.
Yeah, no, and I mean, hopefully we'll get that in this fifth one. We don't know, but I think they've pretty much settled on a formula now where it's, as you said, he's kind of just a character. He's almost like Mad Max, like he just kind of wanders onto the set one day into the story and then gets swept along with it. Which, you know, I'd like to see a story more personal to Jack come back like the first movie. And I mean, as I said, like Johnny Depp, he plays it so well. It's not just the voice and like the slurring words like he is drunk. It's the whole mannerisms. Like he's got the walk down. He's really physical with the character as well. I've just had a look at all the other actors they had in mind for the role of Jack Sparrow, and he's made it such his own character that I can't see anyone else in the role. They were talking about Matthew McConaughey because he looked like Burt Lancaster, who appeared in loads of similar films too, pirate films. They're Christopher Walken, Cary Elwes, and even Jim Carrey. Now I can kind of see the thought process behind bringing in Jim Carrey on board, but there was scheduling conflicts with this and Bruce Almighty. Bruce Almighty turned out to be really successful for him anyway, so you know that's no harm on his career. But this is Johnny Depp's role. In hindsight, I don't think anyone could have played this role as well as he does. No,
what he did with the character, and obviously the entirety of not just the character, the costume, the walk, you nailed it, the stance. No one could do this. And you're thinking of McConaughey then? Like, could you imagine that accent?
All right.
Yeah, he can't be a pirate. Johnny Depp nailed it, and I see him in this. I see Johnny Depp as Jack Sparrow. I see Johnny Depp as so many other people, but this is his career-defining role. And yeah. I feel that, you know, as time goes by, it's nice that he's come back for the fifth one. If it's like the trailer says, the final tale, I think, something like that. Mm-hmm. I hope for whatever reasons, you know, he can hang up his boots and go down on a great fifth film to finish the series off with, because, you know, like I said, I may have criticised the character development, but he's the glue to this. So many people love him, especially the kids do. They think he's hilarious, the bumbling idiot, but he's the lead role. He makes it work, and I genuinely couldn't think of anyone else that could make that work.
Absolutely. And before we get to the second best character in this film, or actually the best, you could argue, we need to talk about my personal weak points of this film, and that is the character of Will Turner and Elizabeth Swann with Orlando Bloom and Keira Knightley respectively. These are just, throughout all the films they're in, mostly in the second and the third one, but especially in this one too, they're an absolute wet blanket of a pair. There's no chemistry, and every single scene that they're in there, they just really bring the film down for me. So I actually don't mind in the fourth one where the characters didn't appear. Like, that wasn't a problem to me. They are kind of part of the main cast though, so it did feel a little bit weird that they weren't there. But the problems of the fourth one, and I know I'm jumping way ahead with this, weren't resting on these characters not being there, because I just really can't stand them. But if we look at Orlando Bloom, this was at the peak of his career. Not only did he have this trilogy going on, but he just finished Lord of the Rings. Like, he just finished wrapping that, so he was in two of the biggest trilogies at the time. And then after this, I think he made like the Calcium Kid, and then he kind of dropped off the face of the earth. And it's actually kind of funny how he has managed to resurrect his career with the Hobbit trilogy, and now he's going into another Pirates of the Caribbean film. So it's kind of interesting how that's worked out, really.
Yeah, Will Turner and Elizabeth Swann. I really like Will Turner. I think Orlando Bloom works as Will. I see the pirate, the kid that wants to do well. I see all of that in him, and I believe on screen. I just can't buy into Keira Knightley at all. I never have been able to. I don't know if it's just me or if it's her entire career. I did like her in Star Wars 1, but you have to guess half the time if it's her or Natalie Portman. There's something about her where, yes, it's the posh English girl, you know, she's Governor Swann's daughter, but they get to time and I mean, this is more the third one. When she's in control, I'm there like, what the fuck is this? Like, seriously. But the first one is my favourite between them, but I feel that Orlando Bloom actually carries their chemistry, if there's any there. I just can't buy into Keira Knightley in these films at all. And she's meant to be like 17 or 18 in it as well.
Yeah.
I just, honestly, I've never liked Elizabeth. I've never bought into their relationship angle. That's why we'll get to it tomorrow. But the Dead Man's Chest stuff, I love Will's angle, because the best bit about the first film is easily, as in the character development wise, is Jack knowing about Will's dad and Will refusing to admit that he was a pirate. I loved that aspect to it. Whereas Elizabeth, there's just nothing to her. She's literally the governor's daughter. She's pretty and Will fancies her. There's your character development.
Yeah, and for most films like this, I'll always say, like, do we really need like a love story, like a relationship angle in a film like this? And I think that's actually kind of like an archetypal thing of these old pirate movies, is that you would have the kind of damsel in distress kind of character, and they do kind of play with that a bit towards the end, where she is putting up a fight, she is holding her own. So I'm not opposed to that element being in the film. I think it's just the two actors they got, and maybe it's the script as well, but the rest of the script's fine. I think if you'd got better actors for this, they could have absolutely made it their own. And I don't dislike Keira Knightley. She's since blossomed into a fantastic actress, I think. It was just around this time where she was making some kind of iffy choices. Orlando Bloom I love in Lord of the Rings. I think he's fantastic as Legolas, but besides that, he's kind of one note. He's more or less exactly the same in everything he's in. Let's talk about what you could argue is the best character of this film, and maybe even the entire series. Hector Barbossa, played by Geoffrey Rush. Oh my god, this guy, he chews so much scenery in this film, but he is an absolute joy to watch in every single scene he's in.
The minute he gets introduced and they speak of him and they whisper him, you know, okay, this guy's a big deal. Then you slowly learn the backstory of him mutinying Jack and bootstrap Bill Turner, and the longer he's in this, every single scene with him is scripted perfectly for his character, his mannerisms. Geoffrey Rush is a phenomenal actor. You've seen him in films like King's Speech. Obviously, the main one's the Pirates films, but Barbossa is a character that, you know, there's a reason they brought him back. He was, as in wrestling terms, he's the bad guy, he's the heel, and the thing is, 90% of I know it happens with an English fan base, but 90% of people love the villains. It's a common trait in cinema, and he is just amazing as a villain. You know he's going to shoot you, you know he's going to stab you, but you just like the guy. And he's got a pet monkey as well. Like, there's what's not to like about him. He was the perfect villain for Jack, and the chemistry when they're together in their scenes, he works well with everyone in this film. Hector Barbossa is the man. Even the costume design, the ripped black hat. He's easily one of the best things about the series.
Absolutely, and I mean, he's channeling. I was trying to look for the actor's name. I found it now. He's kind of channeling the performance of Robert Newton from the 1950 Treasure Island film. Like, if I said to you, do a pirate impression, and you do like the whole Yar thing, like that's where it came from, like from Robert Newton's performance, and you can absolutely see Geoffrey Rush try to channel that. And again, that's the whole bringing old tropes of those kind of films into a modern thing. And he's a bad guy that you just absolutely love to hate, and he's funny as well. And it's not because his lines are inherently funny, like it's not a comedically written script. I think it's just all down to how Geoffrey Rush plays him. He's a guy that you're right, like when he died and then he, spoiler alert for Dead Man's Chest, when he comes back at the end, it was like a crowd-pleasing moment because you didn't want to see his character go. You did almost feel sorry to see him bow out at the end of this film when at the time we did think he was dead. And I'm glad they did bring his character back. He's easily one of the most enjoyable things in all these movies, certainly the fourth one. What else can we talk about? There's a few other characters worthy we can talk about of note. We've got Governor Weatherby Swann, played by Jonathan Pryce. I'd say he's kind of like a bumbling character. He's a bit played for comic relief in this film. I don't really have any opinions on Weatherby Swann, in all honesty, to the point where in the third movie they just kind of kill him off screen.
I don't know why. I always liked him. Maybe because he was the bumbling idiot, but
he's fine. There's not much to talk about, really.
I was going to say it's just like a very, let's get a British guy. Well, obviously it's the British Empire. Don't get me wrong. To be this high command daughter's like, you will marry the Commodore. He just does it great, and it's nice seeing him not in Game of Thrones now. There's the memes where it's like Payday Weekend. It's a picture of him as Governor Swann. And then it's like Monday morning and it's a picture of him in Game of Thrones. For those who don't watch Game of Thrones, he basically ends up like a homeless tramp lookalike. But I like him in these films. The thing with the Pirates of the Caribbean, and this is the entirety of the series, the supporting cast helps make this. Because when you take away your lead characters, there is still characters you can adore, and you can have scenes without the leads. And I think that's the strength of this series. And we get that in each of the 4 films.
Definitely. We'll get on to the crew members in a minute. We've got to talk about Commodore Norrington as well, Jack Davenport. I can't say I dislike him in this movie, because when we see where his character goes, especially in the second one, he's actually probably one of the most compelling characters in the trilogy. Jack Davenport plays it fantastically. He's what inherently should be the hero of this story. And I won't go so far as to say he's an antagonist. He's just very much against the pirates, but because we like the pirates in the film, you could view him as that antagonist role, although Barbossa is kind of the main role in that regard. He's just kind of a guy working for the British Empire trying to pursue the pirates, essentially, in this film, and then eventually he gets that character growth in Dead Man's Chest where he comes down to the level of the people he was trying to chase the whole time.
Yeah, Commodore Norrington is... Maybe it's because he's British. I just remember seeing that ceremony for the first time where he's being promoted, and... It's just such... It's not meant to be funny, but I just always find the whole ceremony funny. Everything about him, that he's clearly in love with this person that's got no time for him at all. I like the character, but it's what you said, the second film you get the character story, and I think that does compensate the first one, because every time I'd rewatch the first film, I know I only saw it a couple of times before I watched 2, but you would look at the first one and say, I completely understand why he ended up as he did. By having that in the first film, I think really did help him, because I reckon he's a character they probably would have written out the second film if they could, but thought, you know what, we've got something amazing to bring him back, let's do it. And it's, they didn't follow through in the third film, but what they do with the character, he easily has one of the best story arcs across the series.
There's one really awkward scene in this film, though, that I always think's just strange every time I watch it. It's in the very opening scene, so you've still got Jack Davenport playing Commodore Norrington, although he's meant to play a younger version of him, and you've got like a child Elizabeth Swann, who's 10, 11, however. It's so weird and creepy.
Yeah, and is he Captain Norrington? It's like he's had one promotion that he is, but he hasn't aged a day, and it's not just the wig, it's the face. I know they wanted to kind of show that, these guys are pirates, these are bad people, and that's what he's talking about, but yeah, it was really creepy. That's what I used to think as well watching that scene. He didn't need to be in that opening scene, just Gibbs did.
Yeah, I mean, you could have still kept Jonathan Pryce being the same age. I don't have a problem with that, but Norrington, just get an actor that's kind of a similar age to child Elizabeth Swann in that scene, so it's a little less creepy. You talked about the supporting cast, though. I'll completely agree with you. I love the crew in this film, and most of them carry over into all the other ones as well. I guess the main two, well, they're not part of the main Jack Sparrow crew in this. They're more in Barbossa's crew, but you've got Rigetti and Pintle, played by Mackenzie Crook and Lee Arenberg. And if you actually... Is Pintle the one with the wooden eye? I always get them mixed up.
I think Rigetti might be the one with the eye.
Oh, yeah, he is, yeah. So, Pintle, Lee Arenberg, if you see him in behind-the-scenes footage, he has got a really broad American accent. So when you see his performance in this, it just shows what a great actor he is, and I love these two. They're an absolute amazing comic duo. We actually have two great comedy duos in these films. I guess we can talk about those during our favourite moments with Murtaugh and Mulroy. But these are great. They're just absolute... The comedy banter between the two. It's almost like you're watching a stage play or something, like some kind of pantomime with these characters. But they're not comedic in a way that's irritating or anything like that, or where it detracts from the film. It feels completely within this world, and that Barbossa, of course, would have some kind of lackeys that are a bit, stupid and comedic.
Yeah, these two are great. For anyone that's ever seen the UK version of The Office, Mackenzie Crook. I never saw The Office until years after I saw Pirates of the Caribbean. I was like, oh my god, Brigade's in this. And for any US fans, he's the equivalent of Dwight. However, it's very, very different to Dwight Schrute. I'm not going to go into details on him, but he's the kind of the idiot of the three of them, the main three. And in this, it's the eye jokes. Everything about them is great. That you can tell, like, if I was to sit down and have, like, I don't know, a 10-minute chat with, like, a duo, in terms of comedy double acts, these guys are right up there. They're great in every film they're in. They've got their moments, but the first one, it's I could speak about these guys forever. There's everything when he's dressed up as the woman doing the sort of the yoo-hoo noises and they're fighting, or when Barbossa, I wanted to talk about this earlier, but when Barbossa just shoots him out of the blue, like, that's a pretty villainous thing to do. And then he just looks at himself like, you shot me. It's just... those two guys are absolutely hilarious, and I was so happy they kept them in the films because they have a purpose to it. They are very funny, and you need that. And that's what I said earlier. You can have characters where you can take off the main leads, and you'll carry fine. Yeah,
definitely. And I mean, you've also got other ones in Jack Sparrow's crew who they don't even say much, but they're just nice to have there. You've got Cotton, who's the guy who's had his tongue cut out, and the parrot speaks for him. You've got Marty, who's the dwarf pirate. And Gibbs, we should probably talk about Gibbs as well, because he's definitely one of the main ones in this, played by Kevin McNally. God, I'm envious of those mutton chops. Like, if I'm going to grow facial hair, it's either going to be the Wolverine beard or it's going to be Joshua B. Gibbs' sideburns. He's a great number two to Jack Sparrow's character, and you get that friendship from them. Like, we discover him in Tortuga, where he throws the water on him and he's sleeping in the pig pen after a night of drinking. And right from there, you know that these characters have a history, and they've been, part of this crew for years and years and years. And that's all down to the script and how, Johnny Depp and Kevin McNally back and forth with it in Tortuga. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and what I love of Gibbs is the very first scene of the film is obviously him before he's a pirate. And I love that transition to when we see him later. He is a pirate now.
Yeah.
Because obviously he was speaking about them before. And, he's just... He's a lovable number two, isn't he? He's like the co-pilot to the Falcon. He's like the Chewbacca. That, yes, there's a Jack Sparrow. It's not as tight as the Star Wars. I'm not going to compare him, but there's not really a Jack Sparrow without Gibbs. Like, he needs to be there somewhere. They're important together. Yes, Jack's the lead guy, but if you take Gibbs out, the film wouldn't feel right. And I think you'd only miss him once he's gone. He's one of those sort of side pieces, but. The crews again are great. I love Jack Sparrow's crew. I like that in the future films they keep some of them in. We lose one or two over the time of the years, but yeah, the crews are great, and the supporting cast for a film about pirates on ships, you need to have a strong cast, and even some of the crew members for the British Empire. There's the double act, which I've forgotten the name of.
But Murtaugh and Mulroy.
Yeah, and I think is there an assistant that pops up in the third film? Whereas, like,
the abandoned ship guy.
Yeah, he randomly pops up in the third film, I think, when Jack Sparrow escapes off the ship in the third film.
Yeah.
And in the first one, he's there, like, he's without doubt the best pirate I've ever seen. Yeah. That guy. And I like the little throwback because each character's got their lines that make them memorable, but they work for the film. There is no one, except of the crew, there's no one that is cast wrong. Everyone is there for a reason. Everyone works.
Absolutely, and the last thing I'll say on the crew members is that this was probably the first movie I saw Zoe Saldana in as well. And then I don't think I really saw her in a movie until fairly recently with like Guardians of the Galaxy and Avatar and movies like that. And she's pretty much in everything now. Like, her career's absolutely just jet-setted after this movie. I think she did a few movies before this, but I heard rumours that she was just treated like absolute shit on the set of this because she was kind of a new upcoming actress and she was surrounded by all these egos. And I think that's the reason why she didn't come back in 2, 3 and 4 is because she was kind of done with her treatment on the set of this, which is a real shame because I did like her character of Anna Marie.
Yeah, and she was just quickly. She was the kind of the highest up of the except for Gibbs. She was highest in the hierarchy of the crew for Jack Sparrow.
Yeah, and I mean, when we go into Dead Man's Chest and we find out what happened to the rest of the crew that went aboard the island of Pelagosto, I guess we know what Anna Marie's fate was, unfortunately. I guess we can talk about best bits then. It's weird to talk about movies like this that, because as I said, we haven't talked about this movie for ages, and even now we're all over the place because we just like it and we don't know what to talk about. But best bits or favourite scenes. Now, I've got absolutely loads because I think this entire movie is just completely well written. It's one of the tightest movies I've ever seen. If I'm going to give a favourite scene, or the scene that I watch the most, it's kind of from the opening right until the end of the blacksmith fight. In the blacksmith, sorry. So that whole introductory section of Jack Sparrow and the bit where he shows up on the sinking ship, the bit where he escapes, and then that leads to the blacksmiths. That's like the part of the movie that I always watch the most. And with the soundtrack and everything like that, I think the track's called "The Medallion Calls." That entire first segment of the film is without a doubt my favourite bit of Pirates of the Caribbean.
There's so many wonderful scenes. I didn't have it in my head, but when you said that, I've got one. More quick one-liners is when the crew are ransacking the town. The posh butler opens the door, and it's just I think is like we get to like what is it, like hello, and then he just shoots him in the head like point blank range. Any scene those two are in, I've got up there because I think some of my favourite scenes do come down to them. Like I said earlier, you've got the boat scene where he's dressed up as the woman and is buzzing and making the sound effects with it. But it's more imagery than a scene. I'm going to when they're walking underneath on the ocean floor, not Jack and Will. I hate that. The science that annoys me of that. I'm talking of Barbossa's crew. It's wonderful. It's the soundtrack. It's kicking in, and they're emerging from the water into the horizon, all in sort of pirate form. The whole build-up of that final third, when they get to the action points, I absolutely love it, and it still gives me sort of not goosebumps as such, but that's still one of the best scenes when they're slowly on the pirate ship, and they're sort of killing everyone. They're doing things pirates do. That scene always sticks with me, and I guess in terms of me, the biggest scene, my sort of favourite, all of it, it's got to be the ship battle about halfway through.
Yeah.
To this day, I just haven't seen anything like this since this. In terms of any of the franchise than Pirates of the Caribbean, it was so amazing to see these ships battling with each other.
And the fact that they actually, I think for the Interceptor they hired a ship and like did it up, and I think they built most of them. I think the Black Pearl, they built the main body of the ship and then they kind of enhanced it with CGI. And I mean, you can't tell when you see the movie. I mean, it absolutely holds up because they just built so much stuff. I think for the opening scene as well, when they're in the fog, I think they used miniatures as well, and it just all blends so well. They built Port Royal, they built Tortuga, they built oh god, what's the cave called?
Oh, I've forgotten already.
Yeah, it's like a Spanish name, isn't it? It's something Muerto. Isla de Muerta.
Isla Muerto.
Yeah, that's it. They spent like 4 or 5 months building that set, and they had all the gold coins out. They had like all polystyrene walls and painted them all to make it look like a rock face, and it just looks incredible. And that's why this one's my favourite, I think, because imagery wise, I think this one has the strongest imagery out of them all. I know you could argue 2 and 3 with Davy Jones, for example, and the Flying Dutchman, but to me, when I think of Pirates of the Caribbean, I think of Port Royal, I think of Tortuga, I think of the Black Pearl, and you have all those elements in this one movie.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal film. The accomplishment of putting this together, it's what I will say now, I've kind of said before, this is without doubt the best of the Pirates of the Caribbean films. It's not necessarily my favourite of the films, but
yeah,
this is, and I think 99.9% of people agree with this. You get a lot of people that say they're all the same. That's why they like the first one, because it was the first one, the best one, that kind of old story. But yeah, the set designs, the costumes. I mean, it would have been so easy for them to have each pirate as the same, but every pirate is distinct. You've got the gigantic sort of like big black guy who's got the really deep voice, and he's kind of got like, it looks like he's got like pebbles like built into his face or something, doesn't it? Then there's the Rastafarian pirate in the same crew. You've got that idiot one with the little grenade from when they ransack. Everyone in this works to their character design and story. it's such an accomplishment, this first film. Honestly, this is truly, I think, because of that fourth film, it's not left in such high regard. The fourth film really did kill some of this franchise, but it was a stunning accomplishment. And like I said, I wish I'd been at my age now watching it for the first time.
Definitely. I wanted to, going off the action as well, I did want to talk about the sword fighting in there. So Bob Anderson, who was an Olympic fencer and he was a fight choreographer, he did the choreography for this movie. He's done loads of other films as well, like Princess Bride, Mask of Zorro, Die Another Day, and the Lord of the Rings trilogy as well. He died in 2012, sadly, and that's probably why most of the scenes in The Hobbit sucked as well, because they didn't have his involvement. But the sword fighting, it's punctuated, it has a rhythm to it, and that's all down to the soundtrack as well. It's the scene in the blacksmiths where it's like the soundtrack is matching their sword movements. I can't describe it, you have to watch the film yourself. It's just so good, like the sword fight and everything, even the final duel between Jack Sparrow and Hector Barbossa. I love how they're moving around the cave and, you know, they're both cursed at this point, and then they'll slip into moonlight and then they'll turn into the skeletons and they'll just immediately come out and they'll change back to human. Just everything like that, the action, whether it be on the sea or whether it be on the land in a sword fight, it's an absolute spectacle to watch. And even more so the fact that, you know, these were real swords, these were really choreographed, and they actually built real ships, and I'm guessing blew them up as well.
Yeah, oh man, these films, well, certainly the first three, loved practical effects, except that gigantic weather storm at the end. But oh no, you can see it. You can see this wood being ripped off the walls with the way they're using the cameras. You can tell that when there is CG, it's blended in so perfectly, but the practical effects stands out to this, and I think it was made at the right time. Where if this had been the first Pirates film in 2017, they would have probably over CGI'd it. Whereas back then, I think it really benefited that they couldn't do complete CGI yet. That helped it.
Yeah, it was really limited. It was really only down to some enhancements on like the ships and obviously the crew. And I think the crew, I mean, this was cutting edge technology at the time. They filmed it with the actors on set. Then they filmed the same scene without any actors on screen, and then they filmed it again in the motion capture studio. And then they kind of layered it all together over the top to create what we see. And I will admit, like, when you watch this film again, I mean, this is a film that's how many years old now? Like 14 years old? Oh my god, I'm so old. And so it doesn't look as polished as it would nowadays, but it works better because everything else is real in the background. And I think that's why a lot of older films, when people say CGI was better, it technically wasn't. It's just because they had to limit it. So there's more real on screen than there is CGI. So the CGI itself looks more organic to the scene.
And some of the CGI looks better in this than modern day films as well. And that's the other thing. You can imagine that when they drew up the concepts for this, it's like, okay, this is all real, but then our VFX budget is going to blow on these characters, and this is why. Do you know what I mean? And I think that works to its favour. The skeleton crew, they look amazing, and I don't think it's dated too badly. I've seen a lot worse from films around that time of CG and how they've been about, but they're absolutely wonderful, and it's truly cutting edge ahead of its time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there was one bit as well where I was talking to you about this before. I remember watching the appendices for Lord of the Rings Return of the King, and Peter Jackson said something like they were coming up with ideas of how to do the Army of the Dead in that film. And this year, Pirates of the Caribbean had come out, and he saw what they did with the skeleton crew in that, and he was like, great, like, we can't copy that idea. So they had to go back to the drawing board and come up with more ideas. And I think as well, when they were talking about how much budget this film was going to have, and I'm actually checking the budget now, it was done on 140 mil. It made 653.3 million, so it was definitely a big hit. The guy came over, I think he was high up in Disney, and he didn't want to give them so much money, and they were like, look, your competitor here is Return of the King, like, what do you want to do about it? So then they gave them more money, and I mean, you can see the money on screen. It's absolutely incredible what they accomplished. I think we need to talk about the soundtrack now, because the soundtrack is a character in and of itself in this franchise.
It's when you think back to the sort of John Williams and Star Wars, I know people are going to talk about Zimmer for this, but we'll get to that. You know, Jurassic Park, Pirates is in there now. Every single person can do the Pirates of the Caribbean theme. Everyone knows the Pirates of the Caribbean theme. It's a wonderful soundtrack. The themes to the characters, you've got the romance themes, and this is the strength of a soundtrack. This is what happens. You've got a great soundtrack. You've got multiple things going on that do work. The romance theme, the Jack Sparrow theme. Like I said earlier, the kind of the the skeleton crew kind of have a theme when they're walking underwater.
Yeah, no, they do. Yeah,
I think that's their theme. Everything works for a reason, and the soundtrack is honestly perfect for these films, and the way they've kind of integrated them into the action scenes as well. Like you said earlier, with the first scene where the music goes in touch with what you're seeing, it feels like an action adventure, and it was a Disneyland ride, and you get that with the soundtrack. And what I want to say is the very famous sort of I've never been to the Disneyland sort of stuff for it, but the classic Yo Ho, A Pirate's Life for Me song, I love what they do with the creepy girl at the start. You can see it in our intro video. Well, not creepy girl, it's Elizabeth Swann, but I love that they kept the song in there, but they didn't make it jokey and piratey. They genuinely did it as a proper outright pirate sort of myth song.
Yeah, it was really clever how they took some elements of the ride and put it in this film. Like, the main ones I can think of are you've got Tortuga's in the ride, and you've got a lot of the same kind of characters. You've got that guy who's kind of posed up underneath the ale barrel, and he's just like drinking beer from it. You've got like the prostitutes there and everything like that. The dog with the keys in its mouth is probably the biggest element of the ride that's memorable from this, and since the success of the movies, they've then gone back into the ride now and kind of added more elements in. So you've got Jack Sparrow that crops up throughout the ride now. You've got Barbossa on a ship, whereas before it was just a regular pirate. I think it was really clever about that. But going back to the soundtrack, when I was growing up, I had loads of film soundtracks. I had like Star Wars, I had Lord of the Rings, but the one soundtrack I actually remember going to HMV, going to a store and paying for it with my own money, was Pirates of the Caribbean: Curse of the Black Pearl. And I got back that night and I must have listened to the soundtrack about 4 times on loop. It was one of the first films where I really paid attention to the music in it, and it just absolutely just captured my imagination. It's fantastic. And I mean, reading about it here on Wikipedia, I was actually really surprised to see how much of an input Hans Zimmer had in this score, because when you buy the soundtrack or when you look at the information on the soundtrack, it's always credited to Klaus Badell, and I guess he came up with most of it, but it seems like he did work in collaboration with Hans Zimmer. Maybe Hans Zimmer came up with a couple of demos or themes. I seem to remember that there's a version of the Pirates of the Caribbean theme in the first trailer that came out for Pirates of the Caribbean, and it's like the soundtrack's like 80% there, like 90% there. Like it's essentially Pirates of the Caribbean, but it's not the one that we all know and remember now. I'd say it's without a doubt one of the best soundtracks ever written. It's every time that main theme comes on, it's like a shot of adrenaline. That's one of the reasons I'm looking forward to seeing the new one, is just to hear that soundtrack again on the big screen. Even apparently 7 other composers are credited as well. You've got Jeff Zanelli and Ramin Djawadi, who did the soundtrack to Game of Thrones. It seems like this was just a real amalgamation of like fantastic composers, and you absolutely get that when you listen to the soundtrack for this thing.
Yeah, the soundtrack is stunning, and with the Zimmer links, he's clearly it says on he's credited as a producer on the soundtrack. He had a lot of input. I'm guessing with Hans Zimmer, if you look at him, he always has a lot of, like, not kids as such, but he has a lot of proteges. And I feel this is a situation where he probably wanted to do the soundtrack, but maybe couldn't for other reasons. But obviously, he then took over for 2, 3, and I think 4.
Yeah, he did, yeah.
And, really, it's wonderful. And then we'll get to Indemnitus, but what he does with it's even greater.
It absolutely ramps it up to the nth degree in the next one.
But yeah, the soundtrack, this film wouldn't. It's one of those. The soundtrack's so good, the film can't work without it. Someone else might have been able to do it, but I can't picture Pirates without the theme.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's going to be interesting to see what the new soundtrack's like, because I know that Hans Zimmer's not doing it. I can't remember the guy that's doing the soundtrack to Dead Men Tell No Tales, but I'm sure that Hans Zimmer still had some creative input in it. I'd be very surprised if he didn't. I guess we'll go on to overall thoughts then. I don't really know what else to talk about with this movie. It's kind of a weird one, really. But overall thoughts on Curse of the Black Pearl?
The best of the series, one of the funnest films to watch, and if there's ever the opportunity to kind of watch this like on a boat one day, then I'd be down for that. It's honestly a wonderful film, and the people might have forgotten about the Pirates franchise, but really, this kickstarted it, and I'm kind of happy it didn't turn into a trend that suddenly loads of crap pirate films came out. It got restricted to this because they knew we've got no chance to be like this. It's a stunning film, practical effects, CGI, characters, story, plot, everything works for this. It's truly a wonderful film, not just a blockbuster.
Yeah, you've pretty much just summed up everything I was going to say. It's my favourite of the franchise. It feels like the most pure. It feels like Pirates of the Caribbean in its most purest form. I love seeing sagas like how they start or franchises, and usually, not all the time, but usually the first entry is always my favourite, and that's the case with this movie. It's Johnny Depp's best performance as the Jack Sparrow character. It completely revitalised his career for better or worse from where we see the characters that led to this, but it's still a spectacle to behold. It still holds up to this day. And, you know, the success of this movie gave way to all the other sequels in the franchise. This is one of the biggest movie franchises out there, I'd say. Yeah, so that'll do it for our review on Pirates of the Caribbean Curse of the Black Pearl. Be sure to comment, subscribe, let us know what you thought of this movie, and be sure to check back tomorrow. We'll be giving our review on Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Man's Chest. Got a lot to say on that one, so get commenting, let us know what you thought of this movie, and until the next review, we'll see you then. Thanks for listening.